Well, good morning and welcome to Bible class, Understanding the Times, chapter 11, biology, or finishing the chapter. We have one more chapter to go, and then we have the last test of the year. We're going to actually finish the book this year, despite everything. And so here we are, looking at biology through the view of Islam. But let's start with a word of prayer before we do that. Dear Lord, we thank you for today. We do thank you for your blessings. We ask, Lord, you be with us, help us as we finish off this chapter, as we look on to the next one and finish this book and finish this year. Just ask, Lord, that you would be with us through this time. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Islam does believe in special creation. This is the belief that the cosmos and all life were brought into existence by the creative act of God. So this is a very different than the other views we've looked at. This is a theistic view, of course, because Islam does believe in a creator God. Now, their Allah is the creator, so that would be we would consider that a distinction between us and Islam. We've talked about whether Allah is the same as our God or not, and he's not quite, but he does share certain characteristics, and creator is one of them. He is also not the creation, and this is separate from, say, a pantheistic view like New Spirituality. Allah is not the creation. The creation and Allah are distinct. That would overlap with a biblical view. He is transcendent, which means that he is above creation. He is beyond the creation. And the creation is perfect. Now, there are some issues with that statement, I think, but they would argue that, they would have the perspective that the creation is perfect because it's the creation of Allah. And the order of creation points to God. They're big on the Kalam cosmological argument. You remember from, I think we talked about that in this class, in the Middle Ages, was an Islamic argument for the existence of God. They look at it as divine authorship points to a divine author. So again, looking at the creation, you look at his authorship, and then you can see the author being revealed. Now, they would oppose trying to harmonize evolution with Islam, though some do. So again, this overlaps a lot with Christianity. We conservatives would oppose trying to harmonize evolution with Islam, but there are Christians who do that. So again, there are Muslims who are evolutionists, but official Islamic teaching would oppose that. However, there are both old Earth and young Earth creationists, so they believe in creation, but they're not necessarily strong on the young Earth. Which is, I will just say, a sad thing, I guess. I don't know what the Quran says about the age of the earth. Perhaps Islam is more open to it even in the Quran. I have never studied that. That's something I need to look into sometime. Intelligent design appeals to them because it points to a designer, a creator, as we just got done saying. They're strong on this idea that design points to a designer, authorship points to an author. And intelligent design does that. And intelligent design is neither old Earth nor young Earth. It doesn't deal with the age, just the design part. It's kind of ambivalent on that issue of age. So therefore, that appeals to them. And this is actually common ground between Islam and Christianity. Islam and Christianity do overlap at this point. Now you'll notice it's not a perfect overlap, but there's a lot of overlap there. All right. Now let's move on to Christianity. And I will just tell you, I was trying to split this out, and Islam was really short, and the conclusion was really short, and Christianity in the middle was kind of long, and so they made this a long section, I know, but it was kind of inevitable. there was no way for me to avoid that. Christianity also believes in special creation, as we already defined it under Islam, excuse me. The Bible does conflict with current scientific theories. Now, please catch this. The Bible does not conflict with science. It conflicts with scientific theories that are currently believed by many scientists. There's a question of whether or not you have an Adam and Eve, an original man and woman, or if everything is just random chance processes creating human beings from nothing, or evolving human beings from nothing. You have the date, the 6,000 years versus 13 to 15 billion years. So there are some definite areas where you have distinct differences between the biblical account and what you're going to hear from the dominant scientific perspective. And Christians do conflict with each other on this. And they give us some of these. Young Earth creationism, they call it young age creationism. I'm used to calling it young Earth creationism, or YEC. YEC is used as an abbreviation or an acronym for this. This is the belief that God created the cosmos and all life in its present form in 6 literal days about 6,000 years ago. And this would be the position of Salem Wesleyan Academy, Allegheny Wesleyan College, and certainly of your teacher. Progressive creationism is the belief that God created the cosmos and all life in its present form in progressive stages over a long period of time. This gets you the old earth with total creation. God is creator of everything. Now, they might believe he used the Big Bang, which I guess wouldn't really be an issue as far as that goes, that God can create in any technique he wants to, including a Big Bang, if that's what he chose. But he's creating life in its present form in progressive stages. So they're following the evolutionary stages, but that God created every form of life. There's no random chance to the development of life. It's creation of life by God at specific times, but over a long time. Theistic evolution is the belief that God created the cosmos billions of years ago and then guided the process of biological evolution to produce the diversity of life seen today. So God starts everything off and then he guides it, but it's going to look like, this is going to take us almost to something, I don't think we talked a lot about deism in this class, almost deistic. God is very hidden. He's not actively creating, he's just guiding random chance mutations. So they're not random chance, they're divinely guided mutations, but it would look like random chance. You wouldn't necessarily see God creating. He's working through evolution, so it looks like evolution, but God's in charge of it. God is controlling it. So this textbook is going to ignore the conflict. That's really cool because you're looking at those 3 choices and you're like, well, whatever. They're all kind of the same. There is design in the universe, and I think that is correct. All 3 would accept that. Although theistic evolution really blames the design on natural selection with just divine nudges. The other 2 actually do directly go with design. They argue that the timing of creation doesn't matter. And this is where I would really disagree with your book, because I think the timing of creation does matter. But they're going to say since the timing doesn't matter, then the 3 different versions are still okay. Life has a chemical base, but life is more than chemistry. And this one, again, all 3 would agree with this. All 3 would argue that life is from God. Life requires more than just chemistry. We talked about that at the college class with the Miller-Urey experiment and the vitalism and the frog in the blender. Life is more than chemistry. You can't just produce chemicals and say that's enough. We recognize that life is built out of chemicals. Living things are built out of chemicals, but life is more than just chemistry. And so the book is trying to go with something that's going to offend the least people possible. Unfortunately, you can't quite do that because probably actually both long Earth and young Earth people, old Earth and young Earth people are offended by the fact that they say timing doesn't matter. So, that's good. It goes. Some basic things, though. They do have some good principles here about biology. Life comes only from pre-existing life. So any life that comes from life already. Spontaneous generation is the belief that non-living matter produced living matter through a purely natural process. And that, of course, is something that has to be true for evolution. However, science doesn't actually support that. We talked about spontaneous generation in our biology class. If you remember the mice in the box and the bugs in the beakers and stuff like that. We did a number of discussion. We did quite a bit of discussion of that in biology. Stinger defines faith as believing something without or against evidence. So he says it is faith if you believe something you don't have evidence for or you have evidence against. And ironically, he's an evolutionist, and but he, as an evolutionist, he must believe in spontaneous generation. And the only way to believe in spontaneous generation is to go against the evidence. So ironically, denying creation requires faith, because faith is believing something without the evidence or against the evidence. The evidence is spontaneous generation never happens. An evolutionist has to believe that everything is the result of spontaneous generation, all life. And so they actually have to have faith in order to deny creation. Whereas accepting that life comes from life is based on all the evidence we have. All the evidence we have is that life comes from life. Even life in a test tube, they're taking living material to start it, and then they usually have to place it into a living organism in order to produce that life. It's not life from non-life. It is still life from life, just with some extra processes. Random chance processes do not produce intelligible information. Random chance processes do not produce intelligible information. And so there has to be somebody behind it. Meyer's example of random Scrabble tiles suggested that you would suspect cheating if somebody were to get the sequence "God does not play dice with the universe" out of Scrabble tiles randomly, because that sequence is improbable by itself, and because of the resources and their probabilities. In other words, where did the Scrabble tiles come from? And what is the probability that you're going to get Scrabble tiles? And beyond that, there's a language here that is being communicated in, and without that language, those tiles would still be random. If the sequence had come up with "God does not play dice with the universe," and it popped up in Russian, okay, it wouldn't work because you have the wrong letters there. It popped up in, Navajo. I don't even know if they have letters. It would to you, it would look like a random series, and it wouldn't mean anything. If it popped up in Spanish, some of you would understand it. But the point is, there has to be a language already existent in order for it to make sense. And that is true of a lot of your chemical stuff, the chemical, like the DNA. The DNA itself, without some sort of context in which that language in the DNA is useful, like the RNA and the ribosomes to produce proteins, you've got to have all of those structures in the cell in order for the DNA to barely be meaningful. Just simply getting the sequence of nucleotides in the DNA doesn't really mean anything, and there's no language that can translate that into proteins. Okay. The immaterial world is real. And Schrodinger, who is not a Christian, recognized that there's a person in charge of his body. Okay? The idea there is that we secularists, Marxists want to argue we are just a body. There is no spiritual. Where, of course, New Spirituality wants to go with there is only a spirit and no body. But anyway. And even Schrodinger recognized that there's a person who's controlling his body. And he says that mind, according to the Bible, actually, mind precedes matter. Thought preceded creation. So God thought in his mind, and then he created matter. So mind and thought precede matter and creation, actually. Thoughts are real, and therefore the immaterial world does exist, which does include then the soul. This is kind of a process, but Christians do believe that the immaterial world is real. There is more than just chemistry to the world. There is more than just biology to the world. There is an immaterial world as well, and that starts with our thoughts and our minds. And we've talked about this before, I'm fairly sure. I lose track of what I've talked about in this class and in other classes, so I think we talked about some of these things. Living organisms give the appearance of design. And William Paley wrote that if you find a watch, then you assume a watchmaker, okay? That was kind of a foundational thing. If you find a watch, then there's a watchmaker, somebody who made that watch. Living organisms look like a watch, which means there's a designer. David Hume said, well, machines do need a designer, but living things do not. Okay? So he pushed back. He said, no, it works for watches, it doesn't work for living things. Richard Dawkins said, we don't need God as a designer because natural selection can perform miracles. And you all know from our science class at the college that natural selection does not perform miracles, actually. The cell is like a factory with protein machines and a DNA computer code. It is much, 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 much more complex than a watch. And the idea that we don't need a designer for this extremely complex cell is actually a challenging statement. We could take more time with that to really defend that. Irreducible complexity is another concept we've mentioned in the college class. A concept that considers the complexity of integrated systems such that if any part is removed, the system ceases to function. An irreducible complexity must be produced by intelligence, not Darwinism. In other words, when an object that is irreducibly complex, where every part is necessary, we talked about the mousetrap, and all 5 parts of the mousetrap are necessary, and you remove one part, the whole system ceases to function. That means you need intelligence. Darwinism does everything step by step with natural selection, following each step, and it just simply does not work with irreducible complexity. And that takes us back to the cell. You've got to have the DNA to tell the protein machines what to build, but you have the protein machines to build what the DNA describes. There is an irreducible complexity to the cell. Number 5, scientists themselves are bailing on the theory of evolution as currently constructed. And they have a whole list of articles described in the first paragraph that agree that Darwinism has failed. Many parts of Darwin's theory have been rejected because there are just many things he didn't know. Okay, so there was a lot of parts of his theory that we've left behind because back then he lacked a lot of knowledge. That's no reflection on him. That was the time he lived in, but because there were things he didn't understand, like the cell. He thought the cell was just kind of a black. He didn't know what it was. It was just there. Now we know so much about it, and that's pushed against Darwin's theories actually. However, even something like the tree of life and favorable mutations are being rejected, which with good reason. And so even though these are still very popular, you're going to find them in biology textbooks, et cetera, there are scientists who are recognizing that these parts of evolution still aren't accurate, aren't consistent with reality. So their conclusion, they managed to throw in new information. Water, oxygen, and light are both necessary for life and are toxic to living things. So the ingredients of life are also toxic to living things. This reflects, sorry, but we're going to do this, on what we talked about with poisons back in our creation science class, the fact that good things in the right place are necessary for life, but in the wrong place, they're toxic for life. And that's true of all of these. Only intelligence can explain how life works. You have to have an intelligence behind life. Not that we need intelligence to explain life, but that we need an intelligence somewhere who can explain how life works in order for there to be life working. Okay. Now, talking about a Christian review of biology will get a powerful response. If you are a Christian and you start talking about biology and you start talking about young Earth creationism or even intelligent design, you are going to get very strong responses, even in church contexts. The podcast I like to listen to from Britain that does debates, they've had young Earth creationists on before, and it's amazing the response they get from other Christians about how angry they are that you're even talking about young Earth creationism. You are going to get a powerful response. And one response is, no good creator would create this. Whatever this is, they're going to say, this is obviously a bad design. The eye is one that pops up. But there usually is a good reason why this was created the way it is. In other words, they'll say, but this looks bad. This doesn't look like something a good creator would make. And there usually is actually a good design reason. Now, I will just comment, the fall does explain why some things are not currently in their prime condition. But here, that they are right. A lot of times the problem is that we don't know. We used to say that the appendix is worthless. It doesn't do anything. Well, it turns out it does. It filters out poisons out of your intestine, which is why it sometimes gets really badly infected. The point is, there's often good reasons why things are created the way they are, and we just have to learn them. All right, well, we finished chapter 11, so now we're getting ready to go on to chapter 12. Congratulations, and have a good day.